Right, okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. I know that we've still got people filtering through, but we've got some speakers that need to sort of jump off fairly quickly, so we thought we'd get cracking. So welcome today to our session. So vulnerability, what it's really about. So we've got some fantastic speakers with us today. So we've got, in a moment, we'll have Kath, who is the Illegal Money Lending Team Liaison Manager. So she'll be talking about victims of loan sharks. We've got Rosie Lyon, who is very kindly sharing with us her own personal story of vulnerability. The same with Jason McMahon, apologies, got a bit of a sore throat this morning. He'll be sharing his own personal stories of vulnerability as well. Lynn Crawford will be talking about the clients that she supports and their own sessions of vulnerability. Ben from Plain Numbers will be talking about members of the public and how he helps them to sort of understand organisations' numberings and sort of explains that in a bit more detail. And then we'll have Helen Lord from the Vulnerability Registration Service who'll be talking about the recently released, as of this morning, Customer Exclusion Report, talking about vulnerability and the definitions that they're in. Heidi, if you can move on to the next slide for me. So just to give you a little bit of a flag, we have our consumer duty training coming up in January, February and March. The link is there, but we'll be sharing that in the box as well afterwards. So if anybody is in the process of starting the consumer duty at the moment, this will be able to give you some head pointers and information on where you can go from there. Next slide, please, Heidi. We've also got another webinar coming up, which is aimed at local authorities and the housing sector. That'll be on the 13th of February. That's via Zoom as well. The link is there, but we'll be sharing that as well. So it just gives local authorities and the housing sector just the reassurance really as to why there is no issues with sharing data. Was that it, Heidi?
I think that was it. Yeah, that's just sort of.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
No problems at all. Okay, so welcome to today's session. As Heidi's already sort of done the admin sort of side of things. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat box, and we will answer them as people are speaking throughout the session today. So the way that it is structured today is we'll have our speakers speaking for a set time slot, and then they'll have 5 minutes questions immediately thereafter for you to ask your questions. If your questions aren't answered, if you can just type them into the chat box, we will ensure that they are answered at a later date. We will get those questions those answers emailed to you afterwards, or we can arrange to put you in touch with the speakers yourself. It's completely up to you, as there's no pressure at all. Okay, I think that is me for the time being. Kath, are you ready?
I am indeed.
All right, okay. Are you going to be sharing the slides yourself?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, fabulous. Right, I'd like to introduce you to Kath from the Illegal Money Lending Team.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Good morning, everybody. I'm always aware on these sessions that I have a mix of people who have no idea who we are and what we do, and people who've probably heard me speak enough times they could do this presentation for me. So I am doing a different take this morning to talk specifically about vulnerability, but apologies for those who could do this on my behalf. My name's Kath Wohlers. I'm the liaison manager with the England Illegal Money Lending Team, which makes it sound like I lend money illegally, but I do not. This is not a confession. I much prefer Stop Loan Sharks, which is our social media handle, which actually describes what we do. So we are a criminal enforcement team who exists to identify, investigate and prosecute illegal lenders, commonly known as loan sharks. Alongside that, we do a lot of work in terms of victim support and witness support for those people who've been affected by this crime. And we also work to try and stop people going to loan sharks in the first place. I came into contact with the Vulnerability Registration Service probably about 18 months ago now, because there's a very obvious overlap. Anyone who has fallen into the hands of a loan shark is by definition vulnerable in some way, shape or form. And I think a lot of the time, the people that we support will have multiple vulnerabilities, which is what I wanted to talk to you about this morning. So I'm going to start off with a story, and it's a story of a lady called Kelly. You may have seen Kelly about 2 weeks ago. She did some BBC News footage for us. Kelly was a lady in Cheshire. She has 4 children, lives with her partner. She works and has money topped up by Universal Credit. She was short of money. The children were fussy about food. They were moaning there was nothing in the fridge. She was having a bad day. And someone that her sister knew recommended that she borrowed money from a lady called Shirley. She went to Shirley and she asked for £100, and Shirley said that was fine. She put the £100 into Kelly's bank account. She told her she'd have to pay back £325, which Kelly thought was a little bit steep, but she was feeling desperate. So she thought, that's all right, I can manage it as a one-off. It's not a problem. She paid back that £325 as agreed, but Shirley kept coming back for more. And Kelly was finding that because she was paying Shirley so much, at the end of the month, she was always short, which meant she had to go back to Shirley again. And this brings me to the first major vulnerability we see with loan shark victims. Quite often, they will not be the sort of people that will look at a bigger picture in terms of their finances. They will very much be living hand to mouth. It will be about, what have I got today? What can I do today? So when we sat down with Kelly at the point of crisis with her, we worked out she'd borrowed in very small loans, £2,600. At that point, she had paid Shirley £26,000 for those loans. And Shirley was telling her she owed £43,000. So there's the financial vulnerability of the loan shark victim. Alongside that, though, was the massive amount of pressure Shirley was putting on her. Constant text messages, threatening to tell her partner about the loan because he didn't know what was going on, threatening to tell the children what was going on because there was the kids went to the same school together. And at the end of all this process, Kelly got to a point where she was earning £1,088 from her job, and she was paying Shirley £900 of that money every month. Loan sharks don't do affordability checks, unlike regulated lenders. They will lend anybody money because what they will then do is make themselves the primary person that you have to pay. They don't care if you're paying rent or if you can afford to pay council tax, or even if you can afford to feed yourself and your family. They will make sure that they are your primary debt, where that money goes to. So that is the cautionary tale about illegal lending, or one of many that we've come across. There was a Centre for Social Justice report done earlier this year, which actually estimated that 1.08 million people in England alone are currently using loan sharks. And that was in March, before the cost of living crisis really kicked in. So you can only imagine that will have gone up. And that's just over 2% of the population. But if you imagine we all probably work with vulnerable people, it's going to be significantly more than 2% of your client base. So we still go into organisations and they tell us they've never come across loan shark victims. I bet the bottom dollar that they have, they just don't know about it. Because one thing loan shark victims get very good at doing is hiding the fact they are a loan shark victim, which makes them even more vulnerable and even more isolated. So one of the things I find with vulnerability and loan shark victims, it's a real push and pull thing. So there are vulnerabilities that we see in a lot of the people we work with that will push them towards the loan shark, but also the loan shark will push them further into. So if you take gambling, for instance, you know, people who gamble may think that they're one big win away from sorting all their problems. And we've had loan sharks who've based themselves in casinos and also in bookies where they can lend people money at the point at which normally they'd have to stop because they've run out of cash. But they also push people into gambling by this idea that you can buy your way out if only you could get that big win and pay the loan shark off. I always say this is a massive misnomer because you don't get to pay a loan shark off. A chap we dealt with years ago now who borrowed £250 to fix his car and ended up paying back £90,000 on that loan. He once said to us that he'd gone to the loan shark and who's been made redundant. He was expecting a lump sum. And he said to the loan shark, what does it take for you to go away? And the loan shark said £6,000. So he took his entire redundancy, gave it to the loan shark, who still knocked on the door next week asking for his £250 because that's what they do. So there's a big link there with vulnerability and gambling. The biggest link of all vulnerabilities that we probably see is with mental health. So victims are often coming from a place where they have mental health issues, be it depression, anxiety, or things like, you know, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and things that will make them more vulnerable, things that maybe will shut them off from mainstream credit as well, and things that will make them not want to engage with people in a certain way. And this is where I think the vulnerability registration service comes into its own. The idea of not having to tell creditors again and again and again what's going on in your world, and just being able to have that done in one place, in one time, so that people don't have to keep repeating their story. In terms of loan sharks, they will prey on people's mental health. So if someone is depressed or anxious, they will prey on that. Quite often it's a very coercively controlling relationship. We do see threats that are of violence or severe intimidation, but a lot of the time it's much subtler than that. It's about telling your boss that you have your hand in the till because you owe me money. It's about telling your partner about the loan in the run up to Christmas, but it chips away at people. And, you know, getting 140, 150 text messages a day, WhatsApp messages, Facebook messages, shaming people on social media over a prolonged period of time wears people down. And that's what the loan sharks rely on, to the point where we've had victims say to us, I don't deserve any help. I got myself into this situation. This is all my fault. I should have known better. The same is true with physical health. A lot of loan sharks will still collect on the doorstep. So people who are maybe isolated in their own home may come to rely on that form of credit. But also we've seen an increase in illegal lending online, which people with physical health issues can be particularly susceptible to as well. People in abusive relationships where maybe they are being forced into financial abuse by a partner, massively susceptible to loan sharks. And also addictions too. You know, if you're trying to feed a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, then you will get money from wherever you can. And this person who might say things like, I've been in your situation, I know what it's like, you just want to drink, it's all right, mate, I'll lend you 20 quid, but then keeps coming back for more and more money and bleeding you dry until actually the addiction is the least of your problems. So what can we do about it? The big thing we are asking at the moment is to get people asking why. Why is someone presenting with whatever issue they are presenting with to your organisation? Why can't they pay you? Is it because they are paying somebody else and that's their priority? You know, why is this person nervous? Why are they anxious? Why are they desperate to get a loan, no matter what it costs them, because they have to pay back a friend? It makes no sense that a friend would push you into a lot of legitimate credit debt. So why is that happening? You know, why is this person shoplifting? We say police. Is it because they can't afford to feed their children? Because they're paying a loan shark? Why is this person presenting? We did some work with debt advisors last year, and of our victims, 36% had gone to debt advice organisations, 0% had told the debt advisor about the loan shark. And when we asked them why, we got things like they didn't ask, or I didn't think they could help with that. And I think sometimes as professionals, we have to be the ones to ask the difficult questions. And the vast majority of victims we work with will say they'd much rather they'd been asked why. They'd been much rather they'd been helped at that point than people had sort of glossed over it and tried to deal with the presenting issue rather than the underlying issue. So what we will do at a legal money lending team is we treat the whole person. We do what's called a needs assessment, and we look at every aspect of their life that could be making them vulnerable to the loan shark. What is their financial situation? What is their housing situation, family situation? What's their mental health like? What's their physical health like? What's their personal situation like? And we will pull in partners to try and address them as a holistic issue to see if we can stop them having to use loan sharks in the future. We will offer as well training to any organisation, and this is my offer today. I know a lot of people on the call will have had training from us in the past, but we're always developing and changing our training to try and make people be aware of this issue, but also how someone may present to your organisation if they are the victim of a loan shark. So that is available. It's free of charge. We don't charge anything that we do, and it's available online or face-to-face. We are happy to do either. We prefer face-to-face. We think training goes across better face-to-face, but we're happy to do it online if people would prefer. I will put my details in the chat because unfortunately I've got to run off to something else at 10 o'clock. If anyone at all would like training, hasn't had training, private sector, public sector, whoever, we would love to get in touch with you. We've trained over 750,000 people across England, and 96% of them said it would help in their day-to-day job. Also, at the moment, we're doing lots of projects around open banking. I spotted there were various banking organisations on the call. So we have a statistic from earlier this year that at 66% of loan sharks are now using bank transfer to give money to their victims, but also to reclaim that money back. When I started in this job 10 years ago, loan sharks were a cash business. It was probably 2% were using bank transfer. We've now seen a massive increase in open banking. So if you're an organisation who is a bank, or if you are an organisation who looks at open banking, we have developed protocols and procedures that can spot illegal lending on open banking, both from the loan shark side, but also the victim side. And sometimes it is as simple as asking the right question in the right way at the right time, and you can absolutely change someone's life before Kelly pays that extra £43,000 that Shirley still said that she owed. That is my whistle-stop tour of vulnerability and loan shark victims for this morning. I hope you all have a really good day. I'm really sorry I can't stay around, but if anyone would like to work with us in any way, we are up for literally anything. You know, we're currently doing Santa dashes dressed as sharks, and we've got selfie frames that blow away in the snow, and all sorts of different things going on. If you want to get involved, just to raise awareness. The main reason people don't report loan sharks isn't fear, or shame or embarrassment. It's that they don't know we exist, and they don't know they are the victim of crime. And anything we can do to raise that awareness has to be a good thing. So I hope you all have a really good day, and please do get in touch if there's anything we can do together.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Kath. I very much appreciate you giving us your valuable time. Obviously, as you can all sort of appreciate, Kath is incredibly busy trying to help spread her message and trying to get it out there to help protect as many people as possible. So unfortunately, she's not able to stick around for questions. But as Kath mentioned, she's going to put her email address into the chat box here, so you guys can drop her a message if you've got any questions that you need to take forward. There it is. It's already in there for you guys. Kath, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Okay, Rosie, are you with us?
Yep, I am.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So everybody, this is Rosie Lyon. She has an incredible sort of story to tell you guys about her own sort of personal her own story of vulnerability that she's very kindly agreed to share with us. She has done so before, but she's doing it again with us today because we created this webinar that was purely about sharing stories of vulnerability. So Rosie, if you'd like to start,
Yeah.
that would be brilliant.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. So my name's Rosie Lyon. I'm 28 years old. I live in Essex. I currently work in the banking sector. I'm currently an executive assistant, but moving over to the vulnerability team to become a vulnerability specialist to lead out on domestic abuse. I am winner of Young Banker of the Year Worldwide 2021 with the idea of a fairer financial future for sufferers and survivors of domestic abuse. I'm also Banking and Finance Businesswoman of the Year, and I've been shortlisted for 2022. I work very hard on all the stuff that I love to do, and so I'm just going to talk about that today. So when I was 17 years old, I got into a relationship. I was with that individual for around 7.5 years. I didn't realise what the situation was like. We talk about domestic abuse, and there's quite a lot. The big myth is that it's physical, but it's not always just physical. So during that time in my relationship, there was no physical sort of abuse that took place. It was more financial and economic, with a variety of other abuses, which I later discovered afterwards. When I left him in 2019, there was post-separation abuse, and a physical altercation did happen. Going through that time, it was very difficult for me. I couldn't leave my front door due to anxiety. I just struggled with absolutely everything because he lived in the same area as me. I didn't get any support because I was working. There wasn't anything anybody could really do for me. I had a joint mortgage property with the individual. I had to leave because when it became physical, I was told to leave. The police wouldn't allow me back in. I got a non-molestation order for my safety, which was granted by the courts, but I was to stay at my parents' because of the fact, and the court said that he would become homeless, and I wasn't homeless. So I was pushed out of my own home. Which was very difficult for me because it was something I really wanted to always have. A mortgage. I got it at the age of 22, and I was very, very happy with that. I'd done my whole property up, and now I was able to go back to it. So, going through all that process was really difficult for me. And then at the start of 2020, I hired a solicitor where, because I was trying to get him to sell the property, and he was refusing to do so. So got a solicitor. I was able to go back to the property to get my stuff due to other abuses that took place. And the property wasn't in a very good state at all. It had been trashed. It was very upsetting time for me. He was still living in there, but he wasn't paying any of the mortgage and hadn't done since June 2019, maybe in drips and drabs parts to me. But once the police got involved, it completely stopped. So I went to the solicitor and we wrote to him on numerous occasions. Obviously, he couldn't contact me because I had a non-molestation order, which he then breached, that become a restraining order. And we tried everything. I even gave the option that I'd sell the property and he could have all the equity, if any, from the property, and I'd go with nothing. But again, due to the controlling aspect of it, he wasn't playing ball. So by July of 2020, paying this mortgage in full, you know, living with family, couldn't leave the front door, really struggling, but still working. I had to make the decision of whether I took it to court, which I got told minimum it was going to cost me £15,000 just to get a piece of paper from the court to confirm that I could sell it without his consent. But obviously he could still cause issues with that, or to stop paying my mortgage. For me, that was very difficult because I work in the banking sector, and usually you need to have a good credit scoring to work in the banking sector and to remain there. So in the end, by September 2020, I decided that I was going to stop paying my mortgage and let it go into repossession, which was very heartbreaking for me. I let the high street bank know who my mortgage is with. You know, I'd had comments of, well, you're joint liable, so you have to pay. You know, lots of comments that weren't very helpful. I wasn't signposted. Banks at that time, really, from my experience, didn't speak about domestic abuse. You know, it was very difficult, but, you know, we let them know. We wrote to her officially. I did everything official to the board with my solicitor. And that was that. So then in October 2020, when the first monthly mortgage payment was missed, even though I'd already shared my story, I was bombarded with calls. I was getting calls every other day, I'd say, for about 2 weeks to start with, asking why I wasn't paying my mortgage. When I'd ask them to check the notes, because I knew there was notes on the system about this, they said they wanted me to tell them in my own words, which was very traumatizing for me. I used to get extremely upset over the phone. And then every time they'd ask consent if they could put a support flag on my account. And of course, every time I'd say yes, but it obviously wasn't put on the account because I'd then have to repeat my story a couple of days later. So in the end, I got moved to a vulnerability specialist team, which was really good. It was just near Christmas 2020, so I was like, finally, you know, so I was like, that's great. They asked for evidence of domestic abuse, which I was happy to share. You know, I was happy to give all the documentation that I could. So I gave them police documentation, court documentation, solicitors' letters. I had a support worker at the time. He was amazing. Got a letter from her, you know, everything that I could. Oh, and also a GP's letter, which is free as per the Domestic Abuse Act. So I gave them all that, and they said that they would, you know, start the process to get it repossessed, which is something, and they knew that I was extremely excited about, which is very, you know, rare. Normally people don't, but I just wanted to break free and get rid of it completely. And then in January of 2021, I was ringing up every week just to see, you know, where we were at on it. And I wanted to, you know, keep vocal with them, keep them updated. And I got the same person for about 3 weeks. So we started to build a bit of a rapport, which was nice. And he was like, yeah, it's going to call, it's going to call. And then when I rang up by the start of February of 2021, they had said they've got somebody else, and they said, actually, it's on hold due to COVID, and we don't know when it's going to start escalating. So I was given miscommunication, and that was very difficult for me because obviously every time I missed a mortgage payment, they were putting a fee of around £800 every single month, and every single month my credit scoring was going down. You know, and then I was a bit concerned. I'd moved home, obviously. I changed all my contact details because I didn't want my ex-partner to, you know, he couldn't talk to me anyway due to restraining order, but I didn't want to be found. I was trying to build myself back up. I'd rung the high street bank. I asked their contact centre if my details were safe. They had said to me, yes, of course. I mean, I wouldn't give him the information, but let me put you through to the debt advice service. From the department there, they'd said, well, it's a joint mortgage application. If he wanted to know anything about the joint mortgage, I'd give it to him. So I was a bit unsure of that. And then when I got put through to the vulnerability specialist team again, they told me that across the board that is a data protection breach and they wouldn't provide it. But I was very unsure. I'd been treated really poorly, obviously by the bank throughout this whole time, and I decided that I wanted to bring change. I didn't want anybody else to go through it, so I come up with the idea of a fairer financial future for sufferers and survivors of domestic abuse. That was built up of 4 points. So you've got number 1, that was raising awareness, 2, implementing training, 3, enhancing policies and procedures, and 4 was to obtain lending opportunities for those with poor credit due to no fault of their own. So I entered the Young Banker of the Year competition hosted by the Chartered Banker Institute. I didn't think it would get anywhere. I haven't got a university degree. Not very good with the bank jargon, even though I've worked there for nearly 7 years. I was very unsure. I couldn't even leave my front door due to anxiety, but I started to get through. So I got through to the quarterfinals, got through to the semi-finals, and then I was through to the final. I was the only female in the final, and I was the first UK female to reach the final of the worldwide competition. My LinkedIn profile started to boom. Everybody wanted to get involved, and I was really surprised at how supportive a lot of people were. I started sharing my story, and then, it would reach, some posts would reach 125,000 views, and it was great. My workplace were really good with implementing my ideas. I started sharing my story worldwide throughout the banking sector and other sectors that requested it, or women's networking, any sort of charities. I started doing lots of volunteering, where I ended up volunteering for around 15 different organisations, charities, to bring change. We partnered with Surviving Economic Abuse, which is an amazing charity, and we started giving training across the board, and I would help with the training by sharing my story, so it's more impactful. And then before the finals, I brought out a domestic abuse policy. It was one of the first ones in banking in Ireland. And I'd spoken to the Irish Culture Board, which is like their regulator out there, and they were very supportive. The policy was for staff, so they didn't have to go through anything that I did. It said what domestic abuse was, the different types of abuse, the myths, and what we could do to support our staff. And I've recently updated that with the help of our HR team, where we give 10 days in annual leave, 5 days paid hotels for fleeing. We give them salary enhancements. Our security team, they also provide help to keep them safe at home, on their way to work and inside of work. Signposting and all other wonderful benefits, which is something I'm extremely proud of. I also brought out a procedure in September of 2021 that allowed sufferers and survivors of domestic abuse to open bank accounts without the need for identification and proof of address. And I'm pleased that other banks have started to follow suit with that. It was good for people like myself that couldn't access a property, say, where their ID and proof of address was left in there. So that was an amazing achievement. And then obviously in September of 2021, October 2021, I was crowned Young Banker of the Year worldwide, first UK female too. And I think it was the first time in the competition that a vulnerability was spoke about, such as domestic abuse, and it's given me such an amazing platform. I do lots of different talks, volunteering, podcasts, blogs, TV, web, everything. I do anything that's brought to me, which is something I'm extremely proud of, and I continue to bring change in the banking sector. My lending initiative, I didn't know when that was going to come about, because it was the first thing in the UK, I think in the world maybe, where we bypass a credit scoring. As I say, a credit scoring is like a prison sentence, but I'm proud that in the bank that I work for our existing customers and staff, we now provide a pilot with lending opportunities where we look at income and expenditure rather than a poor credit scoring. So if you have the affordability, then we can give a personal loan to them customers, which is something that piloted on Monday and something I'm extremely proud of. And I work with other banks to implement that, something absolutely amazing. And to sort of end my story, with my property. So obviously I stopped paying in September of 2020. Finally in June 22, I was given a repossession date. So if you think about all them years of waiting, all the fees for every month, the credit scoring going down every month. The week before my repossession, I was on holiday and I got a phone call from the High Street Bank who said, "You do know your property is going into repossession?" And I said yes, I'm looking forward to it. And they said, well, aren't you going to pay off the debt so we can stop the repossession? After they knew absolutely everything. It's very disheartening, and another complaint was raised, of course, but I'm hoping, as we slowly, see lots of amazing things in the domestic abuse sector in banking, that things like that will stop happening or prevent from happening. But my property has now been repossessed due to the amount of time that it's taken and the complaints that I've put in place, and probably my Young Banker of the Year worldwide competition title, as I've done training for that high street bank. I have been advised that once the property has been sold, which it has, well, it's in agreement, it hasn't exchanged yet, that all the debt will be wiped and I will be debt free. This is something that I'm really, really, really happy about. Something that I think other banks should do. It's very, you do get a lot of lending where it is wiped, but I haven't really seen it in the mortgage area. So it's something that I'm really, really happy about. I will continue in the new year to do, put in a fairer financial future. I will continue to share my story, which there is a very longer version of the story that I've shared in podcasts and that I wondered maybe you'll hear it. And I will continue to build change so people like myself can rebuild their life after going through domestic abuse. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story again.
Rosie, just again, thank you so much for speaking. Every time I hear you speak or see you attend anything, it just blows my mind just how far you've come, and just how you've turned something that was so negative into such an amazing positive, and making other people's lives easier as a result of you sharing your story and you putting yourself forward for these awards and whatnot. It's absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just thank you. It's amazing. Does anybody have any questions at all for Rosie? You can either raise a virtual hand. So for those that are less Zoom minded, if you move your mouse to the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says reactions. And if you click the little reactions button, you've got a little option there that says raise hand. So you can do that. Or you can write a message in the chat box and we will answer it from there. Okay, so we've got Anna Serena. Would you like to ask your question to Rosie?
Hi, yeah. Just to say thank you very much, Rosie, obviously, for taking the time to meet with us today and to share your experiences. I just wondered, you talked a lot about the property and the eventual repossession that's obviously taken place. I wondered, would I be able to ask, when you sought legal advice, A, were you able to get legal aid? And B, if you weren't, was that potentially because of the property being a contested asset? And so essentially the legal aid agency may have expected you to, they would have quantified that as capital, potentially, meant that would have taken you over the threshold. And if that was the case, were you able to challenge that? Because there was a big legal case on that very issue around, and I'm just wondering, were you able to rely upon that legal case and the discretion of the legal aid agency to ensure that you received legal aid ultimately for your?
Yeah, no, definitely. I didn't qualify for legal aid because I earned too much money. Personally, I think I should earn a bit more, but no, I didn't qualify due to that. I was in a really awful situation. So, I just hired a solicitor to do the letters and do talks to, talk to him on my behalf and try and get him to sell. But because I got told that it was going to cost, to go to court like £15,000 just for a piece of paper to confirm that he could, I could sell without his consent, I literally just didn't go any further. And that was the only option given to me, really, was the £15,000 court fee minimum, or that I would just have to go into repossession. So that was literally, I just left it at that. And I think what I was going through as well, I really struggled. I didn't understand. I didn't have the knowledge that I did now. So that would have been another factor, which meant I wouldn't have gone any further.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. Yeah. I mean, the legal aid rates for income and capital are like disgraceful unless you're basically like living on very, very, very low income. If you're just about surviving, you don't qualify for legal aid, which is, you know, an
Yeah.
outrage. But yeah, I'll put the case in the chat for anyone that wants to see it, and the guidance that says that there has to be a discretion now in cases of domestic abuse. So that might be helpful. But yeah, just say I'm really sorry to hear that because that's outrageous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lou Baxter, have you got a question for Rosie?
I can't, I'm sorry, I've got COVID, so I look like a hobbit today, which is always nice. What I was going to say, Rosie, that was a really, thank you for sharing that with us. In the national, I'm from the National Trading Standards Scams team, and we're currently we've just done a piece of research, and we are extending it to put together some more guidance and information on the similarities in the coerce and control in a domestic violence situation and a fraud and scam victim situation, to try and give fraud and scam victims a little bit more prevalence and to raise the profile of that a little bit more, because it is the same thing, but also to learn from and I'll be candid and blatant here, like the victim shame and blame that we put on those victims, and we've sort of changed the language in relation to domestic violence to go to survivors. I think we need to be looking at the same across fraud, but actually it'd be really useful to talk to you at some point about what language do we use with survivors of any of these crimes, because sometimes what we do with that situational vulnerability and those fraud those crime types with fraud, oh, you're so silly, why did you respond to that? Domestic violence situations, why didn't you leave? Those are some of the narratives we hear, which don't then encourage people, A, to report, or B, to actually engage with the support that they need to stop that repeat victimization.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, yeah, I'd be happy to contact you outside of this, and we can discuss further about that, because there is, you know, even like people always have opinions when you go through this, and you know, sometimes it is very difficult, and people will just say, why didn't you leave, and stuff like that. Even using the word like, you know, sometimes people use victim. I don't particularly like the word victim. Some people do, some people find being called victim. I don't. I prefer being called a sufferer or survivor. But
it's
then
disempowering,
like
isn't it?
Victims
really disempowering. So that's what I mean. And we're going to look to run a conference on this, because we really want to learn and map across so that we can deal with that. So from a fraud perspective, where people are essentially, older people sometimes are essentially groomed because of social isolation, and that coerce and control, that the criminal becomes their friend, their partner, their social contact as well. It's the same tactics that people use in domestic violence situations. So, and it's about time that we started. And again, we talk about, and I'm not going to get on my suffragette high horse here, but some of the stuff we talk about is violence against women. It's men's violence. So we need to be really clear, and from a fraud perspective as well, how we treat victims of romance scam. We treat women victims of romance scam very differently to we treat men of romance scams. So there's a lot of gender inequality in this space as well. So I'd be really interested in exploring with you to talk to you about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll put my details in the chat after this, and yeah, we can take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Lou. That's brilliant. Does anybody else have? I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Helen Nord.
It's not really a question. I was just, and I've heard you speak, Rosie, before, and it's very, very insightful. But I know one of the issues around this is the long-lasting effect on a credit history, which can hang around your neck for 6 years. And I just think it's important that we start to really think about this. It's criminal activity in the same way as fraud is, or anything else. So there's nothing really out there to say this record needs to stay on a credit report for the next 6 years and damage somebody for the next 6 years in terms of employment, in terms of where they live, as well as in terms of their financial lives. So I hope we move on from that soon, because it isn't a rule that data has to stay on a credit file for the next 6 years.
Yeah, no, it is. And I've worked with credit referencing agencies this year and last year, looking at that. And it is something that we are looking to address. You know, you can put a comment on there to say you're a domestic abuse survivor, for instance, so when you do lend in, that does flag. But that is not mandatory that they have to actually look at that and take that into consideration. I've also spoken to my high street bank, and I know from banking anyway, but I thought I'd chance it anyway to say, you know, is there anything that we can do? Because, you know, they did hold my property, and my repossession took like over 2 years, and they've, you know, put my credit scoring down every single time. But by their processes and procedures, they've had to do that, and there's nothing they can do to change that. So it's something that I'm going to look at addressing and looking more in depth in the new year.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Again, we just, yeah, you blow my mind every time I hear you speak. It just, yeah. Right, I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank
would,
you.
no worries at all. Thank you. Jason, are you with us?
I am indeed.
Okay, I'd like to introduce you to Jason, who's going to be talking about his own personal instance of vulnerability as well. Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Kirsty. This is going to be a slightly different talk for me because I normally talk about the recent last 10 years, but to focus on the vulnerability side, I'm going to really drill down into my upbringing and also to make it relevant to the call today, really draw down. And it's for the first time in me that I've actually looked back into where I was to a point where sadly I took actions to end my life and the situation I was in around that and the crisis I was actually in, because it's very relevant to today's call. So I'm 52 years of age. I live in Reading. And just to give you a real true understanding about the vulnerability side from childhood all the way through to current day. So a bit of a story of how I am today. My mum went traveling at 18 to Canada. I met my dad, fell in love, got married, had my sister. 3 years later, moved back to Reading and had me. Sadly, 5 years later, my mum and dad split up and my dad moved back to Canada. And my mum refused any support. He had an affair and he went to Canada with the other lady, so refused any kind of support from him financially. So she ended up working 2-3 shifts every single day, and probably with mental health when we look at it, but my sister was very abusive to me and terrorized me. So I grew up really in a really difficult situation where my mum wasn't there, then I was being bullied and terrorized at home. And I either locked myself away in my bedroom or actually just stay out all night until my mum got home. Being very isolated and not really socially skilled, I struggled at school and found myself being bullied at school or made fun of at school. So life wasn't really good as a child growing up. And I left school as quickly and as soon as I possibly could with hardly any complications. And it wasn't until I actually found myself working in a local hardware store selling light bulbs and nuts and biscuits to for dogs that I really thought, actually, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I took myself to college, got some qualifications, and that really set me on a new path in life. And by chance got offered a job, very junior role in sales. And over the next 10 years became very, very successful in sales to a point of national sales business development. And I used to double my salary in commission. So I was very, very successful in life. Up until the age of 40, when I was literally in a really strong position in life, I thought, good job, although I was working 60, 70 hours a week. Just recently married, bought a beautiful family home and birthed my son. That's when things suddenly changed. My work wasn't as strong as what I was in sales and eventually got made redundant. And when I got made redundant, I actually saw that my marriage was breaking up. And I hadn't really focused on that because I was working so long. And also I'm a rugby guy as well. So part of my youth growing up, to escape from the childhood that I had, I found rugby, and rugby became my second family. So I was drinking as well at the rugby club. So not only was I redundant, my marriage was breaking up, but I was drinking too much at home, and then decided it was best for me to leave the family home. And I ended up moving around the corner into a small bedsit, which was basically a converted garage with all my stuff in boxes. So I decided to go to the only person left in my life, which was my mum. She had moved to North Devon at the time, and I drove down to North Devon, which was quite a difficult journey for me in the first instance, just because of everything that had been going on to talk to her about. When I got down there, sadly, the next day she got diagnosed with cancer, and she died 25 days later. So within 3 months, I've gone from having everything in life to nothing, and I spiraled really bad for the next couple of years. And growing up within rugby is very much a drinking culture. It's very professional these days, but back when I was playing and growing up, it was very much a drinking culture. So that was part of my life. And even at the rugby club at the time that I was going through, and my friends were checking on me because they knew that something was happening or I was going through certain things. They'd check in and see if I was okay. I've been there all my life, ex-captain of the first team. I'm a Leo, so I'm very proud. And they'd ask if I was okay, and I said I was fine. And then they'd offer me a drink. which was probably the last thing I actually needed at that time. So I'd carry on drinking at the rugby club, I'd go to the local pub, then I'd go across the road to the garage, buy a bottle of Bacardi and take that home and fall into quite a depressive state. So not only did I have my stuff in boxes, but I had then my mum's stuff in boxes around me as well. So it wasn't a positive place to be. And I also found at the time that I'd fallen into massive debt. I built up over £16,000 on credit cards. Historically, because I used to double my salary, I used to buy things thinking I was always going to get the commission to pay it back. But obviously that didn't happen. And obviously moving into a new home and the marriage and things, my son, I've built up quite a lot of debt. And also one of my colleagues from the rugby club, was a loan shark. So I did borrow some money from him. So the reason why I was doing that is because sadly with my mum passing away, there was inheritance, although it was quite a small amount, but when I say small, it was significant enough, of a substantial sum that I could pay off my debt, I could have a bit of money, I could pay off the loan shark. But it took quite a while to come through. But also at that time of inheriting the money, my mental health, which I didn't actually know what mental health was at that point. My health was really, really bad. I was in a really dark, depressive place, but I just inherited quite a significant amount of money. So I probably wasn't best placed to know how to spend that or what to spend it on. And I actually found that I was struggling personally, and then found myself going to casinos or gambling or other things as well around that, as well as making donations or things to other people, or maybe buying extravagant things when I didn't actually need them. So the money was actually dwindling. And also what I found as well with rent, and the rent that I was paying for the property I was in, I was paying over just about £700 a month to live in a converted garage in the places that we're in. So quite a depressive place. And I couldn't get any benefits on top of that to help with the financial situation, because obviously I'd inherited the money. So basically I was using my mum's inheritance to pay my rent for the next 5 years. And then it got to a point where the money was running out and I struggled to find work. And ended up taking a warehouse job, which is actually obviously nothing wrong with that at all. But for me, that was very entrepreneurial, very positive, very outgoing, very people connected. I actually struggled and found it quite a depressive environment, where I used to come home and just draw the curtains and probably drink and probably feel very depressed, to a very poor state. And one of the key things that I look back on now, very relevant to this conversation today, is that not only were my curtains drawn, but my mail was building up, and all of my problems were probably in the mail. And to help me move forward again, probably meant me opening the mail, but I couldn't actually face doing that, whether it was to do with invoices or bills or just other things that are being offered to me. I was in such a crisis and such a mess that I just didn't want to address it. The thing that I could do better was just draw the curtains and close the door. That sadly then came to a place where life became too much and the pain became far too much overwhelming. And sadly one night I took actions to end my life. And although I survived, which I'm glad here today to be here, it really put me in a position where things had got so bad for someone to actually do that, to fall. And I had no idea what mental health was at the time, and how complex mental health can actually be. And mental health can be many, many things, and crisis can be many, many things. It's not normally just one thing, it's a whole combination of things where things become overwhelming. And at no stages had I reached out for support. At no stage have I actually said out loud that I needed support. And probably what I did need is support and counselling for bereavement, for financial, for drinking, for marriage, for all sorts of things. But it wasn't until, sadly, I've taken the actions that my ex-wife found me, and she gave me the number for the Samaritans, and I phoned the Samaritans that day. And I picked up the phone and I said to a very caring lady on the other side of the call what I'd actually done. And at that point, I said out loud, and I said it out loud to somebody else, but I'd said it out loud to myself. And it's the first time that having said it out loud that I knew that I was in crisis. And that's when obviously I pledged that I'd go and see my doctor. I got and put on all sorts of crisis watch, but I received some counselling, and I started to understand about mental health. I started to self-care and self-learn, and over a period of the next 10 years or so, I've really understood that actually you know, we do go through these struggles in life. A lot of people are going through a lot of complex and crisis at this moment in time. We used to say 1 in 4 of us would struggle with mental health. It's probably more like 1 in 2, if not all of us may be struggling in some way with everything that's going on currently. But I guess the key thing for me in sharing my own lived story is to give strength to others, to recognise signs or to reach out themselves. The most positive thing that happened on that journey is that whilst I was struggling for work, and I'll just come back from a little seaside holiday with my son, he decided to paint me a picture of me and him at the seaside, and I put down the local newspaper to protect the carpet, and the carpet wasn't in a very nice state anyway. It was a very nice property. And to the side of his painting was a job advert for 6 months maternity cover, fundraising for a homeless support charity. And I thought, fundraising, I've just raised just under £3,000 on my mum's hospice. I was in sales. So I applied for the job, 6 months maternity cover, I got given it, and was there the full year in the end as the maternity cover lady took the full year out. And by the time that she came back, I'd raised enough money that the trustees of the charity said, we want you to stay. And I ended up staying there 7 years. And it really helped me to have purpose again and hope. But it also really allowed me to understand is there are a lot of people struggling, you know, like with mental health and homelessness. There are so many different factors about how people can fall. It's how we can help those people fall less, and how they can be helped to move forward again. And that's why I wanted to be part of this call today, because the amazing work that you're all doing to help people like myself that have fallen to rebuild their lives, or to actually allow someone to not fall so much or so quickly or not at all. So that's really why I'm here today, to share that I've actually gone through quite a lot of things that you may be helping people with. And I just wanted to say thank you for your support in helping those reach out. And really that's my story. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Jason, just thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And it shows that it just doesn't start at one point in your life. It can start from before you even been conceived into this world. So it's really, really hard hitting. Just listening to that story is just absolutely incredible. And just to show how far you can come, like you can go from so high to so low to going back up to high again. It's just life, isn't it? It's just amazing at just what one little tiny thing can completely change your life. Like seeing a newspaper article that was the next to your son's painting just completely changed your life again. And I just think it's incredible what people can go through and still come out smiling at the end of it, and then going on further to try and help people like yourself from having to go through things as hard as you did. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I pat yourself on the back, mate, because yeah, that was absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Thank
One
you.
thing I'd like just to finish, just the final positive twist to it is that working in the charity sector for me has been absolutely amazing. And obviously my interest is sport and rugby and now mental health. And in August this year, I took on a job working for Sport in Mind, which is a mental health charity to encourage people to get into sport and activity just to improve their mental well-being. So for me, I'm really in the most positive place ever, having been in the most depressive and dark place, 11 years ago. So I'm going to put my details on LinkedIn. So please, everybody, feel free to connect or message. And thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah. What we're sort of hoping to do with organisations such as the Vulnerability Registration Service is for people to share more about their stories so they can get the support they need. There are resources out there. So by you sharing stories like this, it helps those people to find that there is no shame in what they've been through in their life. We need to change the narrative on that. People, there is help out there. Let's get them to find it. Does anybody have any questions at all for Jason if you wanted to raise a virtual hand? Or put messages in the chat? I'm just piling through the messages. There's lots of messages in the chat, Jason, just saying thank you so much and just how incredible that was. If you want to have a read of that or share that after the events, you can have a look at that at your leisure. So I'm just looking to see if there's any questions in there for you. There's just lots of thank yous. Yeah. Lots of thank yous as well there. Does anybody have any questions at all? Laura?
Hi, it's Charlotte Davis. I don't know if you can hear me. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Charlotte.
Yeah, sorry. Just a question really, if that's okay. Thank you, Jason, for sharing your story. Just one of the things that you mentioned was about the problems we're building up in the mail. Do you have any sort of advice of how firms could better reach out to you at all, rather than just sort of post building up, that could sort of better help and support people going through the same experiences?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first part of that question?
Oh, sorry. It was just around, you mentioned around mail building up and the post, and I just wondered if you had any sort of recommendations of how firms could better reach out to people going through the same experiences.
Yeah, I mean, the mail building up is quite a thing that I didn't really think about until I actually started thinking about talking about this call. And for me, what I found is to break, because the pie was so big, it was so overwhelming, and my life was full of, you know, we talk about stress containers within mental health. It's like having a stress container, all of your problems were in a stress container. That was more or less what the mail was to me. And actually, when even just by separating one or two and actually finding just to open one at a time, dealing with it as you would a stress container, just by letting things slowly out or dealing with some of the bigger problems. Just having again, from a male's point of view, having the strength to say out loud that I'm not okay. Is finding the strength just to open one bit of the mail, because it actually might not be as bad as what you think it was going to be, or you can slowly adapt that. So yeah, very, very good question in a way, and I hadn't even thought about it until planning for this call, but it was very much a big part of my visual side to all the problems in my life. What I've learned now is that, especially for me, I need to break things down into smaller batches of issues and problems and stresses to make it more manageable.
Yeah, definitely. And it's thinking about how firms just, I suppose they have these automated processes where they'll, you know, if a customer falls behind in payments, and then these letters just go out without really thinking that, you know, they are just building up, and, you know, thinking about what you've experienced and what you're going through. And it's not, I'm not saying, I hope it doesn't come across as, because I work for an insurance organisation, you know, how can we better recognise that, you know, when customers aren't coming back to us and talking to us, just better ways of being able to offer that support so that they can feel comfortable talking to us about, you know, their struggles and different things. So thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Just on that, I think just again, because you know, with cost of living and bills coming through, sometimes we don't want to open up the bills because we don't want to know how much, you know, we're going to have to pay for in a row. But I could probably see that, or I thought something was more serious, or it was an invoice or bill because of the way that the mail looked. So I would be more comfortable opening something that didn't look so formal or so business orientated, and make it a bit more personal.
That's interesting.
You know, so
rather than just a white envelope with, like you say, that formal look, it's, you know, or black print and urgent sort of marked over it. I can just imagine that would make somebody go into even more, feeling more overwhelmed, panic as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing your story as well. Amazing the work you're doing. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Jason. Laura Cronin, have you got a question for Jason?
Hi, thank you. Well, actually, it was on a similar theme as the one that Charlotte brought up, actually, Jason. It was around the, you know, what would there have been anything that would have encouraged you perhaps to face opening the letters earlier, i.e., you know, something on the envelopes? But I think you've fully explored that. But just as a side note, just really wanted to replicate what was in the chat and just say thank you, because I've worked either in banking or debt recovery in total just over 20 years. But I'm also a listening volunteer, and actually it was really, I guess, inspiring to hear you share your story and know that you know you do share your story in these platforms quite a lot, and hopefully it will just encourage others to reach out when they need help as well. So massive thank you.
Thank you. Just quickly on that, is following on from previous as well. I think if there was something, because I do know that a lot of services do have a care number, that if you are struggling, then we do, you know, speak to us. I think if there was something like that on the front of the envelope saying, you know, if you're struggling, we have this number department, or we're here to help, I probably would have been more likely to open it, because it's more of a softer, or there's a support that yes, I am, rather than just opening it up and knowing that I owe someone £2,000 which I haven't got. Or
yeah, no, that's really useful, Jason. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Kay, one last question.
Hi, it's on a similar theme, Jason. I work in debt recovery for mortgage shortfalls, and we do find some of the shortfalls we're dealing with are 20, 30 years old, and people's situations do change. As you've shown yourself, they can change very, very quickly and quite dramatically. And people do tend to, for want of a better phrase, bury their head in the sand. They don't answer the phone. They don't open the mail. One thing that we do sometimes consider that I just wanted your opinion on was, well, sometimes we will ask a field agent to actually attend the property just to check if the person's okay, see if we can get them to enter into conversation. We use the narrative that we can't necessarily help if we don't know what's going on. So if we can understand what the person's circumstances are, we can look at what resources we've got available to help them. It may be signposting them to a mental health charity. It may be signposting them to a debt management group. It may be that we can actually help them ourselves in-house if we can just start the conversation. As you were saying, with you burying your head a little bit, again, for want of a better phrase, and not opening your mail because you don't want to see what's in there. And then obviously you became to the ultimate dark place. Do you think if someone had have perhaps knocked on the door and said, we're concerned about you, what's going on, that you may have opened up a little bit?
I guess I wouldn't know that until it actually happened. I know that what I do say now, and I did some defibrillator training once, and people were talking about not knowing how to do it correctly, and the guy training was a close friend of mine, saying the person, they're already dead, they're not going to get any worse. For me, I was already on that path to taking actions to end my life. So if someone had, it might not have made a difference to me individually, but it could well have changed me and may well have put me on the right path, because I wasn't accepting that I had any problems that I wanted to talk to anybody about or share. But if someone had suggested that, then it might, for me, because one of the key things is everybody is different. Everybody comes through their crisis in many, many different ways. So even you suggesting that, for me, it might not work for me, but it might work for John next door. So I would always definitely probably try something like that. For me, if just to put it in, I know we're short of time and we're going into a break, but I got asked so many times at my rugby club if I was okay, and I'd say yes and then offered a drink. If someone had said to me outside of the rugby club bar, where it's noisy and compact and I'm surrounded by friends, and just said, Jason, look, mate, you're struggling, do you want to go for a walk around the pitch? And I said, we're walking around the pitch. They said, mate, I know you're going through some things, do you want to talk about it? It could have changed my life, but no one did.
Well, I just think you are an inspiration to show how low life can get, but that it doesn't necessarily have to stay that low, and that there can be a positive outcome. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, I completely agree, Kay. Lou Baxter has put in the chat that about vulnerability being so fluid, and that we move in and out of periods of vulnerability. The VRS has done some work on this. Well, we constantly doing work on this with regards to our customer exclusion reports, which Helen will talk about a little bit later on this morning. So yeah, just Jason, thank you so much, and yeah, we really appreciate your time this morning, and yeah, just fantastic. Well done, mate.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on the call because I'm learning as well.
Fantastic. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we'll go into a break now. If we stick to the schedule, just because we've got a lot to get through this morning, if we all meet back here at 11:45, I hope that's okay with everybody. So that gives you about 6 minutes to go and have a cup of tea, go to the loo. If you guys just want to mute for now and turn your camera off, if you could stay in the meeting room, that would be great. And we'll see you in 6 minutes. Thank you very much, everybody.
Oh.
One more minute. That's fine, Derek. We'll be sharing the recording of everybody that comes today. Just sent us a message in the chat.
I enjoying being back.
It's great being thrown back into it. You just got to try and remember who I was before I went on maternity leave.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's very
Glad
kind.
you're back.
Okay, have we got, is Lynn back? Back just yet?
Yeah.
Ah, you are there. Fantastic. Right, just wait for Heidi to come back in. You haven't got a presentation with you today, have you, Lynn? It's just you talking.
Yes, just I'm just very unprepared.
No, not at all. Never. I don't believe that. Right, okay, well, we're still recording, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, so it's 10:46. I'd like to introduce you all to Lynn Crawford from Changing Life, who's going to be talking about the work that she does for vulnerable members of the public. Lynn, take it away.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Like I say, I am unprepared because I've been so busy. I think Helen asked me to do this about a month ago, and it's just get pushed back into my diary. So I decided what I would try and explain what my working week looked like, and I just took it from last week so you could see what sort of things I deal with. So my job title is financial inclusion worker. working for Changing Lives, and we deal with people with multiple barriers. So on Monday, I started over a 4-hour appointment with somebody for a PIP assessment. They're very intrusive conversations and things like that. Lots of questions that they asked, and I'm there to support the person if they're anxious, if their mental health's deteriorating on the day, if they've got physical health issues. I'm there to support them through that whole process. And then afterwards, going for a coffee to make sure that they're okay, make sure they've got to look after themselves after the appointment, because it can be very draining. So talking about self-care. Shot back to the office after that to jump onto a webinar for sex work and the cost of living. So people selling sex in order to pay for food on the table. After that, I spent another 2.5 hours filling a PIP form in for somebody else, and then putting that together. On Tuesday, I did something around maths with some people, so people with learning disabilities coming out of prison with in recovery for addictions. So we went shopping, and they were given £5 to spend in the shop, and we went round and with them to see how much things cost and how much change they would have and if they went over budget. And also helped them prepare an income and expenditure. And I had to do 3 different types of income and expenditure because of the needs of the individual. So one of them was computer literate and had access to the phone and internet, and we did an online one for them and they could manage it. Another one couldn't manage online, and so we did a paper version of that one, but they wanted it in large print, so we did that. And another one with learning disabilities couldn't do the online or the paper one, so we did a picture one, so a picture financial statement. So I had things like a bin for the council tax, a house for your rent and things like that, and sort of menu planning. Then I spoke to a journalist about the energy disconnections, prepayment meters and smart meters, and all the issues around there, because they were doing, they're putting a piece together about all that. Wednesday, I did a UC50 form that took about 1.5 hours. And then I spent the rest of it putting it together because the assessment was actually going to be today, so I had to rearrange it because I was coming here, and I had to go yesterday afternoon. So we had to hand deliver the paperwork and things like that, so it would be there in time. So that whole day was like lost because I had to change everything around again. That person speaking about asking the questions, which again are very intrusive, you know, they were shaken, they were crying, talking about their mental health and how things had impacted them to get them to where they were today. On Thursday, I spent 2.5 hours with a new person that I was just meeting, discussing benefit checks, income and expenditures, their mental health and how things are affecting them and how they manage to move forward. And then I attended a remembrance service and spoke at that event for people who had lost in the previous year. And then on Friday, I had an admin day to catch up, which didn't happen. So I had 2 phone calls from people who were crying down the phone. They were cold, they had no money, and they couldn't afford to buy presents. So from the whole week, I was having conversations with men and women around sexual assaults, such as rape, making nooses to end their life, domestic abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, choking, kidnapping, non-molestation orders. I ask a lot of difficult questions so I can understand people and make sure if they're in crisis or if I have an exit strategy and who I need to refer to. I ended on my working week making a phone call to a communications company, and anybody that has read my message on LinkedIn, I wasn't too pleased about their behaviour because I'm a third party and I'm trying to help the organisation and the individual move forward. This particular one, I was on over 2 hours trying to sort it out, I made a phone call, it took me 37 minutes and I didn't get anywhere on that phone call. The account was fraud and financial abuse. And because I'll never ever pass security, myself or the person will never pass security, because we don't know the postcode they set it up to, we don't know the phone number they put on, we don't know the address it's to. And all I wanted was something so simple. I wanted an email address for a vulnerability team, a team that deals with domestic abuse, a team that deals with fraud. All I wanted was an email address. In 37 minutes, going round and round and round in circles, they wouldn't provide me with such a thing. They said they couldn't provide it because they couldn't access the account in order to give it to me, which is utterly ridiculous, because that why access an account is got anything to do with giving me an email address. I tried web chat, I was on for over half an hour, giving the whole story. They were asking questions. If you read the first thing I wrote, you'll find that out. So they said without going, we can't access the account, so we can't provide you with an email address. So I was very frustrated, and obviously in a professional capacity I have to try and contain myself and deal with factual events. So I put a post on LinkedIn asking if anybody had a contact with somebody from the organisation, somebody from a specialist team. I looked up the company on LinkedIn and found some members of staff who worked there, and I tagged them in. And then I thought, oh, I'll Google to see if there is an address I can find, but I couldn't find that. But I did find an email address for the CEO, which is like, so I thought, okay, I'm going to email the CEO. You'll probably just trash it, but you know, I'm going to email him. So I did. I explained the situation. I gave him times when I was on the phone. I gave him times when I was on the web chat and everything. I told him I posted on LinkedIn. I tagged him on LinkedIn so he could read what I said. That he actually read that and he forwarded on to the right department. And yesterday I had a resolution to that, which is what I wanted, which is the debt was written off and the credit report's now going to be not impacted. But that was a fight, and a fight for me that was difficult. A fight for the person I was working with wouldn't be able to do it. And I also invited them to come along today, so that, because it's not just about my individual, it's about all those other individuals who can't do that, who need an email address, who third parties who help them, who need an email address to help the two come to resolution. So I thought the whole thing was just utterly ridiculous. It was an absolute waste of my time, when I could have had an email address, sent a form of authority, the information to back it up. They could have done I would have waited a reasonable period of time for them to look into it and had a resolution to it. Obviously, they just made that whole thing difficult, and 2 hours, more than 2 hours of my time is, I need to be spending it on other things with, you know, other individuals. So I went home, and on Saturday I was doing cleaning, and we pulled out some furniture and I found black mold all across one of my walls. So I just sat on the bed and burst into tears. And as a worker dealing on the front line, you have what's called vicarious trauma. So because of all the things that I listen to on a daily basis and the things that I hear, and I have to protect the people, then there is something like, normally I could go home and, okay, I'll treat the black mold and I'll do the things I need to do, I'll research it, I'll go and buy the paint, whatever it is. But after the week I'd had, I just burst into tears because there was nothing else for us to do. So I'm still suffering from that and dealing with that, and I have to do self-care, and I have to make sure that I'm okay in order that I can help the people that I help as well. And some of the other people have mentioned on the call about different things, and I've known people who've had 100 voicemails on the phone that they won't listen to. I've had people bring us 2 black bags full of letters that they have not been able to open, and we've opened them together. I write my name on the back of the envelopes that I send people to, so that to encourage them to open them, because they don't know it's from me. So that's pretty much all I had to say today.
Lynn, just Thank you so much. You know what, it's really encouraging to actually see someone actually explain what their week has been like, having to deal with all of that and then having your own stuff at home as well, and how that impacts you. You rarely hear in the world that we work in, people actually saying how it has impacted them personally. So thank you so much for doing that. We really do appreciate that. It's incredibly brave of you, and as I've said before, the work you do is just so, it's just amazing. Like, you are literally, as someone else has put in the chat, you are changing lives, and having that week, I'm not sure that I'd be doing this webinar today. So again, thank you so much for everything you do, and for coming today. I mean, you'd never have known that you weren't prepared, because yeah, I think that might not have been too true, because that was very well organized.
Literally, I've written it this morning. Like,
well, that's still organized, dude. It's all good.
Just try and write it down, something.
That is absolutely incredible. But thank you, because it's sharing your own vulnerability with us. So thank you again. Carolyn, you've got a question for Lynn.
Yeah, so Lynn, you're always at your best when you just turn up with a bunch of notes, you know, because it's all up there and it comes from the heart, and we see that this morning. So thank you for sharing another one of your stories, you know. And it's always fresh. It's always happened in the last few days, that your stories. So we know they're rife. There's a lot of people on this call who work in the organisations that you try to interface to, and you know, some of them might be in operational roles and some of them might have digital responsibilities. What one task would you like them to go away and do straight after this call?
I would like them to make it easier for people, and to remove as many barriers as possible, and to have as many mediums for contact. And you know, if somebody's trying to contact you, to try and it's hard enough to start that conversation, especially with mental health. And if you're putting barriers in, that's just that one little thing for a phone call that's not answered within a few minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. If you're waiting 40 minutes, the people I work with, I've sat next to them and went, then I would have told them to F off by now. You know, they can't be on the call that long, they would have given up. And obviously it's my job, and I'm going, right, okay, we need to get this sorted, so I'm there calming them and, you know, doing that. But then I'll go home and I'll have to deal with my own mobile phone bill or whatever. And if I'm on hold 40 minutes, I'm really irate. But in my professional daily life, I have to be a calming influence on the other person. But after I've dealt with that all day, then I'm annoyed. I don't want to wait on the phone 40 minutes when I get home after I've been on hold all day at work. So just remove as many barriers as possible for people. And it's not about people's disability or vulnerability or whatever. It's about how it impacts them. Because two people suffer from have epilepsy, they don't have the same issues. So one might manage and one might not. So, you know, one might have medication, one might still be falling over. So, you know, and having seizures. So it's not about what it is, it's about how it affects you and how can we help. You know, so people will tell me what's wrong with them, what they're having difficulties with. And I'll go, right, okay, so if somebody's got anxiety, and they'll go, well, this is how it manifests, but somebody else can tell me something else, and I adapt to give them the best possible service I can, and how to encourage them and support them through the process.
Thank you.
Great answer, thanks.
Laura, you had a question for Lynn.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. Lynn, wow, thank you. I was getting a bit choked actually listening to some of that, not just what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but also, you know, you're human as well, so it can't not affect you. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, you know, you do have self-care, and, you know, hope you've got a good support network around you. But again, mainly thank you, because you mentioned something there about one of the barriers of just trying to get an email address and the challenges with that when you can't clear data protection. Actually, that's something that I'm going to take away with today, just to make sure, because we work in a similar way where there are specific email addresses depending on the file that my guys are managing. So actually, I want to make sure that you know, we've got a generic email for a scenario like that. So thank you.
No, that would be brilliant. It's just, it saves me when I'm helping the organisation. If somebody's getting, the organisation's getting billed for somebody who's not going to pay for it under fraud, like I'm trying to help you as an organisation as well as the person I'm working for. So like, please make it easier.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. See, Lynn, already changing people's agendas and things to make things a bit easier for organisations like yourself that are trying to help people.
Yeah.
Andy had a question for Lynn.
It's not so much a question, it's more of a comment. I empathise completely with everything that Lynn said. I personally have, due to other outside influences, the last year I've had a lot of stress and anxiety in my personal life. And work, even though I'm having stress in that, it's always been something that I can forget about my own personal problems and concentrate on my customers. But I've been to a place recently where even that I've not been able to concentrate on things. So regarding the anxiety and vulnerability of an advisor, completely understand that. Regarding the problems she's having with email addresses and telephone calls to organisations such as utility companies, that has been my bane of my life to very recently. Basically, a lot of them don't have email addresses anymore, so you can't just email a customer care with an authorization and a query or anything. You try to ring up and discuss even personal items and you're getting cut off. It is getting harder and harder to contact the creditors in general, and I find it really frustrating. And I would presume that everybody else who deals with customers from arrears and debts point of view will be having the same problems. That in itself is not only putting stress on the customer, it's putting stress on the advisor. So I just want to reiterate everything that Lynn said, and I completely agree where she's coming from.
Great, thank you so much, Andy, and thank you for sharing your own sort of instances that you've sharing your vulnerabilities with us as well. I appreciate it. Does take a lot sometimes to hold up your hand to ask a question, let alone to talk about your own personal experience.
No problem.
So very much appreciate that.
I'll just tell everybody that I do have an absolutely amazing support network from my team, my manager, the other managers, up to my CEO. They all know about like my mental health. We're trained on vicarious trauma, suicide prevention, and we have training on training. So, you know, all of those things, but we still have to self-care. I can have as much training as I need, but I still have to self-care. And if I say to my manager, I need to, you know, I need a break. So like, absolutely clear your diary. What do we need to do? Who can we help? What do we need? And that's the support I have. And I know that others don't have that, and I'm very, very fortunate.
That's really good to hear, Lynn. Thank you. And I hope that other organisations sort of take your lead and continue in the same vein for all the advisors that are on the call today, and for anyone that's working and needs support. Hopefully organisations will see webinars like this and take it on board that we are all human and we do need support. Okay, well, thank you so much again, Lynn. Hats off to you. Thank you very, very much. Okay, now do we have Ben?
Hi, Kirsty.
Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not so bad, thank you. Heidi, are you okay to share Ben's slides, please? Oh, have we lost Heidi? No.
I can share them.
There she is.
Oh, perfect.
There she
Thank you.
is. Got to give her half a second. Apologies, Heidi.
Thanks very much for that.
No problems at all. I'd like to introduce you all to Ben Perkins from Plain Numbers.
Hi, everyone. Really lovely to see so many people on the call today. And I just want to, before we start, just to extend my thanks and the words that other people have said about the stories that have been shared so far today. I know it takes a lot to share those kind of stories, so thank you for doing that. My name is Ben Perkins. I'm the head of partnerships at an organisation called Plain Numbers, and we are looking at an area of vulnerability that perhaps isn't talked about as much as many others, but is really, really significant. And to introduce that, I'm just going to show you a little bit of data which originated from the FCA's occasional paper 8. So those in FCA regulated firms may have seen this before, represented as the infographic with the map on. What we've done here is we've used that data and represented it in a slightly different way. And what you can see here is that there are lots of factors in that paper that were identified as making people vulnerable, one of which is poor numeracy. And once you look at the graph in this way, you can see that poor numeracy is the vulnerability that affects the single largest number of adults in the UK, according to the data used by the FCA. And to be absolutely clear, what I'm not suggesting in this graph at all is that one person who's been impacted by poor numeracy would be impacted in the same way or to the same extent as people who have other vulnerabilities. And I'm not at all suggesting that all of the important work that's going on with the other vulnerabilities is in any way less important. All this is to do is to highlight that there is an area of financial capability and therefore vulnerability that perhaps we don't talk about as often as we maybe should. And that problem is kind of two-pronged, I guess, in that there's the poor numeracy skills that people have, but also the way that people feel about working with numbers, and therefore the way that they engage with the consumer information that they receive. So if we just go on to the next slide, and I think you might need to double click because there's some weird animation going on. Perfect. So 1 in 5 adults in the UK experience this thing called maths anxiety. And I don't know if that's something that people are familiar with, but it's that sense of dread or fear or worry that you get when you're faced with working with numbers. So 1 in 5 people experience that. And it's something that we've recognized in academic research for decades now, since way back to the 60s. But awareness of it amongst firms as something that affects their customers' behavior, but also awareness of it in the public is really, really low. And you can see there the word cloud that was produced by Dr. Tom Hunt at the University of Derby, showing some of the feelings and emotions that people get when they receive information that have lots of numbers on it, particularly pointing out things like avoidance, panic, fear in there in the middle. And that has an impact on real people. So I've used some statistics, but it's not just about statistics, it's about the real human stories. And those impacts, if we just go on to the next slide for me, there's difficulty understanding communications. So for anyone who works in an FCA regulated firm, it's really important. Maybe the one big takeaway from this section is to recognize poor numeracy as a vulnerability with the consumer duty needs, which also recognizes poor numeracy as a vulnerability within the paper, in that people can have real difficulty understanding communication sent by firms, utilities companies, financial services firms, any others, because the information that we send is often inherently mathematical, and therefore it can be difficult for people to actually understand. People who experience maths anxiety are likely to be the kind of people that tend to avoid their finances altogether, to see a whole load of numbers, think, oh my God, get that panic, get that dread, and do what we do when we feel anxious about something and push it away from us and try to avoid it. And it means that these people are more vulnerable to financial harm, either because they're not engaging or because they don't fully understand the decisions that they're making, less able to meet their financial goals, and they can make decisions which aren't informed. And I would never say that poor numeracy leads to people making bad decisions, because it's not for me or anyone else here to judge what is and isn't the right decision for someone. But those decisions can be uninformed, and therefore later down the line, it starts to expose some problems for them. And I'll just put a few stories on that for you from customers' perspectives that I've spoken to. For some reason, they're going to go randomly in reverse order, but it's fine. So the first one, I remember a lady that I spoke to a couple of years ago now, talking about getting her mortgage from a high street mortgage lender. She talked about the fact that she felt really anxious and she was totally baffled, but she just nodded along to everything because ultimately she wanted to buy a house. She said she had no hope of understanding the letters. And later she realized that she had a mortgage that maybe she couldn't really afford, and that caused her lots of financial troubles. Another one for you. This is a very typical story from someone that pensions, as an example of an industry, is one that has lots of numbers and lots of complexity in it. And people describe being immediately overwhelmed by even looking at a pension statement. You can see language in there like there's no point in trying to work it out. I'm just ignoring my pension and hoping for the best. And obviously I don't need to put any further on the consequences of what that could be for someone when it comes to retirement, if they have no idea whether they're prepared or not. And lastly, perhaps the one that sticks in my mind most strongly, and perhaps most relevant to some of the things that we've been talking about today, someone who phoned up a debt support service, and I'm not going to name that debt support service because it could have been any of them. So she's terrible at maths, terrified of numbers, and they were asking her for her annual income, and she worked on shifts. And therefore it was quite a difficult calculation. She didn't just have a figure, but she described to me the way that the support worker got really, really frustrated, almost as if she was a difficult customer, because she thought that that information was being held back. But what it was that the support worker didn't have any awareness that she might be completely overwhelmed and that she might really struggle with the numeracy. She ended up feeling really embarrassed, and she told me that she just hung up. She didn't ask for help again for years and ended up more than £30,000 in debt when she had reached out when she was only a few £1,000s in debt. So that one's the one that really sticks in my mind most prominently, and maybe a really key takeaway from this presentation is that if there's one thing that you can do if you're supporting vulnerable customers, just be aware that they might feel anxious about maths or they might not have the skills, and to bear that in mind. But bringing it on then a little bit into what we can do about it, and there's going to be two of these on the screen in a moment. What we do at Play Numbers is that we work with organisations who communicate numbers to help customers by changing the way that they do that and making it easier and clearer for people to understand. So I've picked out this example, and this is not to criticise any individual firm, but this case study just happens to be ClearScore, who are obviously a leading provider of credit solutions. The first one, it was their original communication, and the second one was a Play Numbers version, and I'll show you the results in comprehension in just a moment. But just to notice, the first one relies a lot on percentages, on understanding technical terms like balance transfer, knowing the difference between the interest rate and the balance transfer fee. The second one is much more tied into what people's aims are for the actual communication and how much they need to pay when they'd be out of debt if they took out that card. Just ignoring the names of the cards because they're unhelpful, but they will be on ClearScore's control. So what you can see is we're actually doing the work for the customer in that communication. And there's another example on the next slide, which is from Thames Water, another of our partners. And again, there's two versions of this. The one that you can see first is the original version, and the second one is the Play Numbers version. And you can see this utilities bill, it's just stacked full of numbers, calculations. We've even got numbers in there to 4 decimal places. We've got prices all over the place. And loads drawing your eye. And this is the kind of classic might overwhelm someone who's maths anxious kind of communication because it's stacked full of numbers. You can see way less numerical information in the second one, but staying within the regulations. Also, just bringing more attention to more important numbers and making sure that people understand the key messages and giving the numbers more context. And the results of this intervention then that we did, we trialed this with 5 firms originally, and these were the results. So we had some nice qualitative feedback about how much it would help customers who were vulnerable. But you can see on the graph there, just to orientate you towards it, the black bars are the original comprehension for the communications, and trial 5 is the Thames Water one that you saw, and trial 1 is the ClearScore one that you saw. Also featured on there, trial 2 is Swinton Car Insurance, trial 3 Octopus Energy, and trial 4 Direct Line Group Home Insurance. And what we found was low levels of comprehension, even compared to what we expected. So if we take an example of Octopus Energy, who are seen as a market leader in terms of supporting customers and communicating clearly, they still had less than a third of customers understanding their original communication. And the way that we measured that is really significant, particularly with the consumer duty coming in. What we actually did was, rather than asking people simply, do you understand this? We were asking them the key information about the communication. So for example, on the Thames Water one, we asked people, how much water did you use and how much did that cost? And if they got 4 or 5 of the questions right, we said that we thought that they understood it. Now, if we look at the orange bars, that's for the plain numbers intervention, so that you can see on average across the trials, comprehension doubled by changing the way that we use numbers and paying that more attention. And in some cases, even more than that. In the Thames Water case, almost tripled the number of customers that understood that. And just to show you one last interesting takeaway before I wrap up, because I'm conscious of the time. One of the really key findings of this report, which I think is really important for people who work with vulnerable customers, is that we also checked perceived comprehension. So before we did any of the other testing in the randomized control trials that we used, we asked people, do you think this is clear, fair, and do you understand it? Now, the blue bars here are the proportions in each trial who said that they understood the communication. You can see between 6 and 7 and 10 in all cases said that they understood it. And then the black bars are the black bars that you saw before, which are the proportion of people that could demonstrate that they understood it. And there's a huge gap, and therefore an exposure to foreseeable financial harm for all of those people in the middle who think that they understand, but actually they haven't properly understood what the firm wanted to convey. These people are the most vulnerable to making uninformed decisions because they think they know, but they actually don't. And one thing, therefore, to take away from this slide in particular, working with vulnerable customers, is that even if they say they understand, they may not. And therefore, they may need help with the way that things are communicated. And just on the last slide before I wrap up, because that was a real whistle-stop tour, and I could have done this session for 3 hours because I think there's so much interesting stuff in there. So if you wanted to find out any more information, we're on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I'm in all of the posts advertising this session. So feel free to connect and chat there. Have a look at our full research report, which you can get on the Plain Numbers website, which goes into those findings in much more depth than I have time to today, and get in touch with me directly. And I'd love to talk to anyone who's working for a firm that communicates numbers with customers that would like to hear more about how we might be able to support. And you can see some of the organizations on the screen who are already working with us to address this issue. And we can definitely have a chat about how we work with partners if that's of interest. But I'll wrap up there. I hope you found that useful and interesting.
Ben, thank you so much. It's so interesting to see the in-depth side of that. I mean, as a person myself who I hadn't realized before, but I do suffer with that. I am one of those people that suffer with issues with numbers. So forgive the terminology, but I feel very seen right now. So yeah, it's really, yeah, it's forgive me for not being able to get my words out properly. Had a baby 5 months ago, brain's not fully back on board yet. When I was on maternity leave, I was having to write out forms for my husband who was going to be taking parental leave, and I had to work out the timings and the costings on the forms from the ACAS website. And I don't know who wrote it at ACAS, but they could very much do with your help. The form that I had to go through. I spoke to 3 separate advisors. All 3 advisors had no idea what the wording meant either, so they had to go and speak to their managers. And eventually we got there, but that's just one example of how numbers can just completely baffle people. Does anybody have any questions for Ben at all? Lynn, if you'd like to ask Ben a question.
Yeah, Ben, thank you for that. Obviously, I spoke about income and expenditure and doing picture income and expenditures as well, which is not something accredited industry can do, but it helps the individual I work with. But I have a lot of issues around benefits and people understanding the benefits. Have you even tried to get into the DWP to sort them out?
Short answer is yes, but I almost feel like you know from the question that getting into the DWP is not the easiest job in the world. So we've had loads of conversations with people in the DWP about various areas, including universal credit and benefits, but even things like pension provision and state pension. There's endless opportunity for the DWP to do things better, and we'd love to work with them. And what I don't want to present is that DWP, and someone's mentioned HMRC as well in the chat as well, and absolutely right, to be that we're criticizing them in any way. It's that we've kind of got an approach that can make this change happen, that we're trying to convince people to use, and they haven't done it yet, but it hasn't existed for a very long time. If I make the comparison, and I was thinking about it when Kirsty said she felt seen, the Plain English campaign has existed for decades, and rightly so. It's much needed, and it should, and loads of firms are engaging with that. Plain Numbers has existed for 2 years. So it's unsurprising that lots of those kind of government communications are a bit behind the curve, but we'll keep working on it, and hopefully we'll get there.
Great, thank you. Paula has said in the chat, Ben, really interesting, thank you. When you saw a more limited improvement in trials, such as a direct line trial, do you have an idea why that was? Was it the type of communication they were looking to improve, or something else?
So there's lots and lots of factors that affect this. I think the first thing to say is that it was a more limited improvement, but still much more significant than most other interventions on comprehension. To get that 6 percentage points was quite significant. But the main reason behind it in that particular case was it was a tricky area in terms of regulation. So the communication was about helping customers to make a decision about the amount of excess that they should put on their policy. And there was a lot of FCA regulation that had to be complied with. Sometimes having to provide more information is not necessarily helpful to the firm in terms of being clear about the messages that matter. And we think that made it more difficult in that circumstance to get an improvement. But in a way, we were pleased to show that even in those dynamics and in those circumstances, it could still be better. And 6 percentage points when we're talking about the number of customers that Direct Line Group have is a lot of people. So we were still quite happy to have been able to get around that.
I mute myself, apologies. Thank you for that. Carolyn, you had a question. Oh, you're on mute, Carolyn.
Thank you. Yeah, great presentation, Ben. And you know, I think as I work a lot with vulnerable customers.
You said you didn't audio.
No, thank you. So I work a lot with organisations supporting vulnerable customers, especially in journey mapping and persona development and things. And what I see is people intuitively jump towards financial vulnerability. They might go towards physical or other mental disabilities or challenges. Plain English is on the horizon. He says, well out there, but it's on the horizon in terms of needs and in terms of thoughts. Is Plain Numbers a campaign? Is it something we can get behind? But you know, is that something I can help you with in terms of getting it going some more? You're a company. Plain English was a campaign, wasn't it? So what can we do to help Plain Numbers become more to the front of people's mind?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. We put a lot of our work, because there's so much work to do, on changing the communications within the firms and training them to do that. But what we would love to have around us is people that can understand what we're saying and what we're trying to do, and be a voice to consumers, because we know that once customers start to do, as they sometimes do with Plain English, and say, oh, this isn't very Plain English, they start saying this isn't very Plain Numbers, more and more firms are going to start paying attention to this issue. So I think the thing that you can do most to help is to talk about us, tell people that this exists. And very often organizations will say, oh, I hadn't heard of that, actually I do care about that, I hadn't thought that through, never seen that issue before, but I can see how it's there. So the more talking you can do, the better. I know that's a very fluffy thing to help, but it matters massively to us.
No, it's fine, that's good, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So we can just keep to time a little bit. Sarah, if you can pop your question to Ben in the chat, we'll ensure that that gets answered. But if we can share Helen's, Heidi's already doing it, she's reading my mind. Helen, so I'd like to introduce you all to Helen Lord from the Vulnerability Registration Service. Helen, go.
Hi
take it
everybody.
ahead.
Actually, Heidi, could you share them, because I'm failing abysmally my slide.
I was just looking, actually. I don't know whether I've got your latest ones. Did you send me your latest ones over, Helen?
Yeah, I sent them yesterday.
Okay, right, give me 2 seconds.
I'll
You
try
start
and
and I'll find them.
Okay, well, what I was, I mean, my sort of overwhelming sense of this morning is amazing to listen to all those stories. Thank you so much to all those presenters for being so candid and honest about that. I think that the message from that is that vulnerability is incredibly complex. It's no wonder we sort of struggle, and it's difficult to try and give out help to people, because there's so many different facets to it. And we've talked about this morning, we've talked about economic abuse, we've talked about numbers, we've talked about suicide awareness, loan sharks, and I think Lynn has actually very clearly shown the impact on people actually trying to support people who are in vulnerable situations from a work point of view, and the fact that those people also need to be equipped and supported. So I think it is difficult to deal with vulnerability, and I think that's why we struggle. It is so subjective. We can all tell our own story. We all have a situation that we can talk about, but I think what we have to bear in mind is, as organizations, as service providers, we have to think about how that vulnerability affects our relationship with us. We can't change the world, we can't change people's lives, but we can extend the right level of support, I think. So Heidi, next slide please. So we as Vulnerability Registration Service, when we started out, and it was 6 years we started out, our message really was that we wanted to be a one-stop shop for vulnerable customers, and I think I've probably stopped using those words a little bit over the last couple of years, but I pulled it back because I think it's absolutely essential with the way things are going at the moment. We collate a database of vulnerable people that may be directly from the individuals themselves, it may be from people who are acting on their behalf, people signposting to us, but I think the fundamental objective that we have is to provide one route for individuals, consumers, customers to communicate their vulnerability. And by doing that, we are also looking to ensure those people get targeted support. I'm very concerned that where we may go with collating data and data sharing is to have lots of different pots of vulnerable data that people have created and are subsequently sharing out. So the vulnerable person has an extra layer of complexity around what they're actually doing. So I think our objective remains the right one. Let's try and make sure that wherever vulnerable data is held, let's have a route to collect that and distribute it, so that there is a one route for consumers and there's one route for organisations trying to provide the support to those consumers. If we want customers to highlight vulnerability, I believe they should only have to do it once. If we are to identify vulnerability in others, I believe it makes sense to have that a central source. Not everybody will highlight their vulnerability and not everybody can, but equally, I don't think we should wait and worry about what about those people that aren't prepared to tell us they're vulnerable. Well, yes, let's try and capture those as well, but let's not use that as an excuse for not supporting the people that are happy to communicate their vulnerability. So I think the one route aspect of this is really, really important, and I just wanted to really sort of hone that down, and that's what VRS, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of where we get data, how we share it, all the rest of it. I think most of you have heard that before, but that's why I think that sort of channeling is extremely important. So next slide please, Heidi. The current climate, apart from it being very, very cold, and I've noticed particularly as I've been sitting here for the last couple of hours, and we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, I think the things that are standing out to me. We've put out our vulnerability report today. It's on LinkedIn. There's a link right at the top of the chat today. One of the most outstanding stats that came across to me out of that, and it was the same when we did the report last year, 10% of people consider themselves to be at the risk of eviction, homelessness, or repossession, and of those, 13% of vulnerable people are in that situation. So I think that is a tremendously strong and scary stat. That's before you start to worry about people, whether people can actually afford their heating, their bills, etc., etc. All those people who are fearing that they actually are going to have a home in the near future. I think that really tells us the extent of what we're doing. I mean, some of the other stats we've talked about earlier, Kath talked about loan sharks, and we do work with Kath closely to try and onboard data about people who we are identifying as victims of loan sharks. But when we look at our figures, and Kath said pretty much the same, about 2% of the population are falling victim to loan shark. We also saw in our report that about 16% of people are using food banks, which I think would have been unthinkable a few years ago. So that's the backdrop of where our report came from, and I'll go into some more detail as we move on. But in terms of talking about the current climate, obviously this is a cross-sector issue. Anybody who has a vulnerability needs to potentially communicate that to every single one of their service providers. So I think all of them, whether it's insurance, whether it's telcos, whether it's financial services, utilities, whatever, we're all trying to address how to support vulnerable people. But certainly in financial services, we've got consumer duty now, and any financial services company falling under the FCA regulation should have a plan in place in terms of consumer duty from the end of October. That should start to be implemented next July. And I think it's really critical around vulnerability. I think a lot of treating vulnerable people in the right way is just down to very good customer service. And I think if we're treating our vulnerable customers right, that's really in the spirit of what customer duty is about. And I think listening to somebody from the FCA talking recently at the MAL conference, he articulated it quite well, and it's about considering how we treat consumers throughout the customer journey. It's not just about when we are onboarding them, when they're encouraging us to start spending money with us. It's about looking at that whole relationship from the beginning to the end, and managing that in the right way. Another thing that's in the background that I think, again, financial services companies have to take into consideration quite carefully is the draft credit information market study that's come out from the FCA as well. And there is a lot of focus in there around vulnerability, and it's talking about whether vulnerability should be flagged up through credit reports, whether that's a route. And I mean, I have very strong views about this, and I think we will respond to it. But I think it is important that vulnerability is highlighted through the credit reference agencies. Again, I think that shouldn't happen in separate, disparate pockets, because I don't think it's serving anybody well. I just always think of a vulnerable customer, a vulnerable individual sitting there, head in hands, not knowing where to turn. I think we have to make it as easy as possible for them to communicate that, because even doing that once is very, very difficult. Energy providers obviously coming under increasing pressure. There's a lot of talk about a joined up priority services register. I attended a meeting a couple of weeks ago with many key stakeholders there, talking about priority service registers and whether data should be shared. And I think there is massive appetite to do so. And personally, I think it's absolutely the right thing, and we should get on and do it. I also saw a tweet from Martin Lewis the other day. It says me sounding like I'm well up on Twitter, which I'm absolutely not. But he was also asking opinions about whether there should be a shared priority service register. And I think the response that I saw in that meeting, the response I saw to his tweet, and the response I've seen over the last couple of years talking to organisation, is there is still an absolute pervading fear of breaching data protection, about consumers' privacy and how we manage that. So it almost creates a sort of paralysis of us actually being able to move forward, share data, and consequently support customers. So I think we've really got to break through that. We've got to break through that fear of data protection. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying we don't have to comply, but it shouldn't. The fear of somebody doing the wrong thing should not be at the expense of supporting millions and millions of people by sharing the data and supporting them. Carolyn Delahanty's put something in the chat earlier on. We are, and Carolyn spearheaded this, writing into governments to try and get some real momentum around data sharing, and that's not, there's no blame or criticism here. I know utilities and energy companies have been working tremendously hard to do this, but try and give it an extra little push, and with that to try and ensure there's the confidence to start sharing data, and that isn't the fear in terms of breaching data protection. Carolyn sent that out to for signature to about 50 financial services and energy companies, many of whom are actually on this call. If you want to be involved, Carolyn's details are in there, and please do come on board, absolutely. Just lastly, before I sort of launch into this report, I think the other thing we struggle with when moving forward in terms of supporting vulnerable people is a fear of mismanaging customers who we identify as vulnerability. Rosie spoke up very eloquently about her situation of financial abuse, and I think that there's a concern that maybe when we have identified vulnerability, are we going to treat people in the right way? Are we going to make matters worse? And I think the reality of that situation is we need to look very carefully at our customer journeys, make sure they are created and thought through in the right way. And some of the people that are vulnerable are going to need treating very carefully and need specialist treatment. Others just need to be treated in the right way. So if we move on, the report that's been issued today is our vulnerable customer exclusion report, and it's on LinkedIn. There's a link in here. I'll cover some of the stats and figures that came out of it. There aren't any massive surprises in it. There's an issue out there. There's lots of vulnerable individuals out there. We repeated this exercise from last year. Obviously, we are just feeling the impact of the cost of living crisis, so I think some of these results will get worse. I guess the difference between this one and last year's, I don't think we'd seen the full impact of the throes of the pandemic. I think that was still filtering through when we did the report last year. But I think this is really, as much as anything, a call to action, highlighting some of the areas that we really need to focus. And my message is always going to be, we need to share data about vulnerable people. I know that's not necessarily easy. I know there's challenges involved, but it is definitely the right thing to do. So next slide, please. Thanks, Heidi. So who is vulnerable? And again, these figures are pretty consistent. About 27% of people consider themselves to be vulnerable, and that's fairly consistent with figures that the Financial Conduct Authority have issued before. Not all of those people are necessarily going to put their hands up and say, I'm in vulnerable circumstances, and I think indeed it would be a challenge if they did, when we're trying to manage people. If a quarter of a customer base were all highlighting vulnerability, but those are the figures. Slight variation between men and women, but not massively so. Some key figures that I pulled out here: 60% of people that are unable to work consider themselves to be vulnerable, 41% of people unemployed and currently looking for work consider themselves to be vulnerable. And I guess that sort of drives the financial aspect of what we're doing. What we're trying to do here, I think, is not just look at indebtedness on its own. We're actually trying to look at that combined with other factors and contextualize it, if you like. Is it financial indebtedness combined with mental health? Is it financial indebtedness combined with coercion? Are there physical health or health aspects that need to be taken into consideration? So it's sort of broadening out the definition, if you like. I've also pulled out here carers, because I personally think this is very, very significant. When we're talking about personal stories, I guess this lends itself to mine. One of the drivers for me wanting to be very involved in vulnerability registration service was having had a father with Alzheimer's and having seen the impact on that. I am a carer for my mother, and I'm not pretending my life is anywhere near as difficult as an awful lot of carers. I think those individuals in themselves are often very, very vulnerable. They are often juggling their own lives with caring for somebody else's, so the problems are twice as big. And to act on somebody else's behalf, as Lynn outlined a little bit earlier, is a complete nightmare. And I don't think we have the answers to that yet. We have power of attorney, which in itself is actually very difficult to get somebody to take consideration of. And then we've got, again, data protection. I can't speak to you because of that. So I think that's a really key thing. Next slide, please, Mike. Can you hear me okay, Heidi? Because, yeah. In what way are people vulnerable? This has taken the definitions from the Financial Conduct Authority, and again, I've broken down the figures. The figures are talked about more in the report. What I would take from this as very significant is the older people are, the less likely they are to put their hand up or identify as vulnerable. And I think that's essential for us to bear in mind, because clearly the older somebody is, that the chances are, I guess, statistically, they are going to be vulnerable. So we don't want to miss that. And I think that's part of the danger of us sort of living in a more and more digital world now. Something else interesting, I guess, about this, younger people, particularly 25 to 34, more likely to highlight the fact that they've got mental health issues. I think another thing which will come out more as we move forward, our database, our vulnerability registration show that a significant minority of people who you would consider to be comfortably off are now falling into the, I guess, pot of vulnerability. So next slide, please, Heidi. So this is taken from our database, just to give you an idea of who is actually registering as vulnerable. And you'll see the UK one is the dark blue line, the red one is VRS there. And again, the pattern is showing that it's not that significant in terms of retired and older people. They're certainly less likely to register with us. And I think young families, young singles, and families, we see a lot of people in social housing, which is one of the reasons we're very, very keen to work with the housing sector in terms of what we do going forward. And the next slide shows how I think we do have a worry in terms of digital exclusion. I think digital and financial exclusion really are overlapping now. And I put my hands up. VRS is a very digital way to register. We are where we are at the moment. But I think, we've looked at our database, we've looked at our survey, and we have to bear in mind, we think everybody's sitting there with a smartphone. They're not. 6% of people don't have a smartphone. That's 9% amongst vulnerable customers. 4% of people don't have access to the internet at home, which is increasing to 7% amongst vulnerable customers. So when we're pushing everybody down a digital route to communicate with us, all those customer service issues become even more important to really look at. We saw 13% of people said that they were finding it difficult to communicate with organisations, and that increases to 27% amongst those considering themselves to be vulnerable. And another interesting stat, actually, looking at organisations actually asking people about their circumstances and their vulnerability, our figures would suggest that in energy, 79% of people are never asked. That raises and energy companies are actually the best at actually asking that question. So we're not actually asking the question all the time to really understand people's circumstances. digital and automated routes work for a lot of the time. A lot of vulnerable people don't really necessarily want to speak to somebody. They far more happily communicate in a digital way, but everybody, and that's probably a lot more common in terms of older people. And I think the other consideration we have to put in here is, are we making sure that people are able to voice, to have a voice? Are we actually pulling away a safety net? Are we actually making people almost financially dispossessed? Are we increasing the chances of them falling into unregulated credit and the hand of loan sharks? And that's why I think, you know, we really need to understand how we deal with vulnerable people in terms of high cost short-term credit, in terms of credit unions, etc., because they are really that safety net before people slipping into unregulated credit. So next slide, please. So just focusing on young adults, as I said, young adults are more likely to put their hands up and say they are vulnerable. The 16 to 24 are amongst the to consider themselves to actually to be vulnerable, and a lot of that is to do with mental health. There's also quite a lot of financial capability cited in there. We see when people are using our vulnerability flags that people don't tend to just tick one anymore and say, I have this situation. It's usually things that are coupled together, and again, the obvious one being financial hardship, indebtedness coupled with mental health. And also interesting here, and again, we're trying to work very much with online gambling companies. People who are vulnerable are more likely to have a gambling problem or an addiction. I don't think there's any surprise that's out there. 13% of vulnerable customers took out online gambling accounts compared to 7% of the UK population. So again, just another symptom there. Next slide, please. Missed payments and mental distress, and there's lots of figures out there about this. And again, I'd just say that this is probably before the cost of living crisis has really hit. 46% of vulnerable customers have experienced mental health struggles in the past 12 months. 22% have continued to receive calls, emails, or visits chasing up repayment. I think we've always made very clear with what we do with VRS, this isn't a get out of jail free card. It isn't, we're flagging up you're vulnerable, therefore you don't have to pay your debts. We're just trying to enable people to be managed and dealt with in a considered way, an appropriate way. And I think the conversation with Jason earlier around the mounting post and just putting it away, I think it's really with texts, calls and messages isn't the right way to do it. We should never miss an opportunity to engage with a vulnerable customer properly. We probably should do that early on. We're actually working at the moment with Webio, who are just launching an app called Kanzo, which is very focused on trying to enable consumers to communicate how is the best way to communicate, I guess with them, which I think is vital. That sort of fear, sticking your head in the sand thing is a massive thing. It's that sense of being overwhelmed, which I think is common to people who are in vulnerable circumstances. So 19% of vulnerable customers have missed payments or gone into arrears in the last 12 months, and 15% of customers have been fined for non-payment or late payment of debt in the last 12 months. And again, I would say that's something we really need to think about. If somebody's in debt, are we just putting them into a spiral when they become more and more in debt? We're just, we have people on repayment meters still, yet they're the ones that can least afford to pay it. They're the ones that are struggling in terms of getting their vouchers through. And I know there's reasons for that, but it's the people that can least afford it. It's people who are in a position where their house may be repossessed, and we are fining them because they're not paying back their mortgage payments, making it probably impossible for them ever to scrabble themselves out of that situation. We really need, I think, to pull back and have a look at that. Next slide, please. So data sharing and vulnerability, and you know, we talk a lot about whether people want to share their data, whether they're prepared to share it. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Just because everybody doesn't want to, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't support the ones that do. 60% of vulnerable customers would tell an organisation they're in vulnerable circumstances. If asked, 64% would consider letting details of their vulnerability be shared if they were better supported, and 68% of vulnerable adults would consider registering with a free service if it took on the task of flagging their vulnerable circumstances on behalf to other organisations. So the figures are high. People are prepared to share the fact that they're in vulnerable circumstances. And just, I think, worth mentioning, going back to somebody put a note in the chat earlier, very good point about transient vulnerability. You know, things do change. People need to be able to flag their circumstances up, and it may be a bereavement, it may be a relationship breakdown, it may be somebody having a baby, it might be for a limited period of time. So it's important that that data can go on to be shared and be taken off, and also not be held against them retrospectively in six years' time. So next slide, please, Heidi. So that's really it for me. I put the link to the report at the beginning of the chat. I'll probably stick it in, or somebody will again in a minute. Please read it. Please share it. It's really just a bit of a call to action and showing the situation we're in now. It's complicated, it's difficult, but I just think it shouldn't actually stop us from moving forward and doing what we can to support people. Okay, thanks, Kirsty.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Helen. So I'm just copying and pasting the link to the report that you've just said into the chat so everybody's got hold of that. Okay, so there's a question in the chat from Rosemary saying she'd like some guidance on to help someone with managing this. Was that a question directed at Helen? Rosemary? Yeah, if you want to come off mute.
Yes, it is. It's a particular when Helen was talking about you know, people burying their heads in the sand, not opening the letters, and you know, Jason talked about that earlier as well, just not being able to engage with anything, and that is where I'm at with trying to help, you know, my person to try and make some progress, because you know, she is in difficulty and it is having a lot of impact on me financially as well. Not just financially, but, you know, emotionally, because it's such a worry.
Right. I don't think there's a perfect answer to this, but I'll give my 2 pence in, and anybody else obviously feel happy to chip in. There is no stigma attached to being in debt, or there shouldn't be, and I think increasingly we need to understand that, you know, one of the days where we should feel ourselves at blame for being in debt. You know, it can happen to all of us. Circumstances change, so I think that's the first thing to understand. The second thing, although certainly the organisations that I speak to now, there's a shift in terms of them having a level of understanding, a level of appreciation, a willingness to actually help people. And that first engagement, that first conversation will probably stop somebody having sleepless nights, having that complete fear. It's a step in the right direction. It's a massive step, but it will make that difference. And I always think about that waking up, at which we've all been there, and I would bet every single one of you have been there, that sort of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, being totally overwhelmed, petrified. That first conversation will go a long way to stopping that. There are debt management companies out there, organisations out there. The organisations where somebody's indebted to will help. And there are many professionals on this call who I think would confirm that now.
Yeah, not what I'm dealing with is a young person, okay, who's, you know, in quite a lot of difficulty. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to compromise her privacy, but she's got some issues, you know, with her mental health, and she's been in a lot of difficulty circumstance-wise for quite some time. So that's impacted her mental health, and that's why she's got into this kind of difficulty. So what we're faced with now is that I've been in I've had a bit more leverage, and I've been able to help her to deal with it. We can't get to that first step that you're talking about of, you know, actually, because I've got access to all the information we need, you know, to do the things we need to do, or need to be done, I should say, because I've got to be careful I don't kind of disempower her, you know, from doing things herself. But when you're faced with a situation where nobody's doing anything about anything, and, you know, the stress is kind of causing, you know, her to put her head under the covers and causing me, you know, a lot of worry. What, you know, where do you go from there?
Well, I mean, if you can get over the barrier, I guess, of encouraging her to speak. I mean, if you speak to an organisation on her behalf, and I would imagine you are going to have data protection issues in terms of them giving you information. There's nothing to stop you giving them information. If you can find a way of getting her authorization for you to act on her behalf, it's probably the best route I can imagine. I'm looking at other organisations out there to tell me what they would probably do, because they're probably dealing with this all the time.
Yeah, I have come across some, you know, a number of different options along those lines. What about the VRS then? What about her registering with the VRS?
Absolutely, register with the VRS, and if there's indebtedness and there's mental health issues, absolutely. Please do, and our information is out there, but it is not yet, and this is where my call of action comes in. Not everybody is using the disability registration service yet, so it is dependent upon those end users actually using us to see that. There's no detriment to her being added, and it will help support her.
Right.
But
okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Thank you very much.
There's a question from Tina. What are your thoughts on training health professionals about the VRS? I suspect to know the answer to this one, Helen.
What training health professionals?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on training health professionals about the VRS?
Well, I mean, all the awareness of VRS, I'm totally behind, whatever it is. I'm not entirely sure under what circumstances, but I mean, yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Okay, Lynn, you had your hand up.
Mine was for Rosemary. It wasn't a question for Helen. I was just gonna try and help Rosemary, but this might not be appropriate. I don't know.
No, please, Lynn.
So young people and mental health. There's a debt and mental health form as well that could be completed if they're able to give you the form of authority, so you can act on their behalf. You can ask the creditors to just place things on hold until it's stopped. But if you're trying to engage with a young person, it's a case of maybe putting that to one side for now and building a rapport. So going for a walk, going for a cup of coffee, something like that, so that they can see that you're a friendly, you're an ally, not a friend. You're a friendly face, and to build a rapport, and you have to do it in their time. When they're able to do it. So it might be that they can only open one letter on the second appointment that you see them, and then deal with that one letter, and then the next time you see them you might be able to get 2 letters. So I sort of track people and their behaviour, so how they're responding to us in text, and things like that, so I can see if I feel that there's a deterioration in them or something, or if I need to raise a welfare or a safeguarding issue. So I monitor how people talk to me, or if they always respond within 5 minutes or half an hour, and then I don't get a response within a day, I'm like phoning them up going, are you okay, is everything all right? So quite often for me, the first thing isn't just diving straight into it, because if they've had loads of distrust, and depending on what their mental health issues are, it can, if they're paranoid schizophrenic or something like that, then there could be quite a lot of distrust. So if you know what it is, what they are diagnosed with, or how it's impacting them, that can help you work with them as well.
Can I just say something just to sort of guide you? It is a family member who I know very well, and I've been walking alongside her for a long time now. But I think the issue is more around trying to support her to sort of act on her own behalf and not undermining that, and trying to sort of manage that process. Because I could go out and do stuff. I obviously haven't got the authority to do that.
Because they have to live independently at the end of the day. They're a young person, and they have to live independently, and they have to manage these things. So
yes,
it's about it's not about taking over. It's about you could go to the bank with them, and you could rehearse what you need to say to the bank, or to go and collect a prescription, like, okay, this is what they're going to ask you, this would be your answer, and you stand with them, and then they might look at you and go, oh, I'm too overwhelmed, I don't know what I'm doing, and then you go, right, okay, just say that. And usually you find the people on the other side of the counter will take the time, will listen, and will say to the young person, it's fine, it's all right, I'll wait. So it's things like that.
That is helpful. I think probably the major thing that you've raised there is about kind of picking the right moments, tracking behavior and picking the right moments and doing the right things as well, not being too heavy going about stuff,
Also can be a third party as well. If if a family member can sometimes be too close, and they can tell you quite easily to go and take a runny jump off, whereas a professional, it's unlikely that they were going to say something like that to me. They might disengage with me, but then I'll be like saying, what's happened, why have you disengaged, and things like that. But if a family member, the relationships can be quite close, so you might not know everything, and obviously they can just tell you to just go and do one. So sometimes a third party can help you, and support that family member.
Well, what I'm trying to do is delegate that responsibility so that she learns to trust other people, more, because she has had a lot of difficulties, with poor treatment from other people. And, I tend to be the default person, you see, but we're kind of at a stage where she needs to be able to step away from that, and learn to trust other people a bit. So that's what I'm trying to encourage at the moment, but we're kind of stuck,
Thanks, Rosemary. There's another offer for support in the chat from Laura Cronin, Rosemary. So what I'll do is I'll drop you an email with Laura's email address, and you guys can engage in a narrative after today's session.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries at all. Okay, so thank you all. That's all we've got time for today. But thank you all very much for today's session. We've had some excellent range of speeches. We've had some really amazing, fantastic questions that have really helped towards engaging today. I just want to thank all of our speakers profusely for sharing their individual stories, the work that they do on an ongoing basis. And it's just, it's a relief to see that there are organisations out there that are similar to the VRS in their story, and that they want to support people, they want to help people that are experiencing very difficult times in their life. And it's just really encouraging to see these kinds of organisations. Is there any other questions at all that anybody wanted to ask before we tie up for today? No? Okay, well, again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I mean, I'm really, really pleased with the turnout that we've had for today. I think we had about 160 at one point, but as we are recording today's session, the session will be emailed out to you. All the presentations that we had, the speakers have kindly agreed for us to share those as well. Please do get in touch if we can support you any further with your vulnerability journey. There's a couple of, apologies, my dog barking in the background. There's obviously a couple of training sessions that are coming in the new year on the consumer duty, and our next webinar in February aimed at local authorities and the housing sector.
And just sorry, and the report links there. It's also on LinkedIn. I mean, please do share it if you feel appropriate on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a, if you're celebrating, happy Christmas. If you're not, just enjoy the rest of the year.